David Anders, aka Dinosaurus, appearing in the Invincible comic book series is an interesting villain. While he does incredibly evil things, he is genuinely trying to save the world and the human race from climate change and the fact that we are destroying our own planet and resources. That just got very real. Following in the logic of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, he has done some truly awful things, like destroying the entirety of Las Vegas. But still, Invincible saw the good in this villain, and he decided to team up with him anyways. Unfortunately, that was a mistake. From Invincible issue 98 to 100, we got an event called The Death of Everyone. Mark had been affected by the Scourge virus and had temporarily lost his powers, and because of that, Dinosaurus took things into his own hands, distracting Invincible and the heroes with devices in Los Angeles that caused earthquakes, while his real plan was to detonate devices all over Greenland, melting the ice and leading to a massive rise in sea level, wiping out thousands of people living in the world's coastal cities. It's hard because on one hand you can understand why Mark would trust this villain, but on the other hand you're like, dude, you really should have known better. As some of you loyal nerds may know, this next spot is one of my favorite moments in comic books. So to preface, in Marvel Comics, Magneto and the Red Skull should not be allowed in the same room. Given each other's past, especially at the time of World War II with Red Skull working German forces, and Magneto and his family being victims of one of the worst atrocities mankind has ever committed, perpetrated by the very group that Red Skull was a prominent part of, it's safe to say that these two wouldn't ever work together. But that's not actually the case. In Acts of Vengeance from 1989, Dr. Doom, Kingpin, Wizard, Mandarin, Magneto, and the Red Skull were all temporarily united by Loki in a common goal, which isn't really relevant to this point. What is relevant is that Magneto was pretty unsure whether or not this was the same Red Skull that aided Germany in the slaughter of his people, or if it was someone just using the Red Skull name and look. So Magneto just straight up asked him. Yes, this was the same Red Skull, and he even compared Magneto's own crimes to that of Red Skull's short-mustached leader in World War II, and that was dumb. Magneto almost instantly turned on and overpowered his fellow villain. Magneto doesn't just end him though. No. He instead leaves the Red Skull in a stripped-down fallout shelter 20 feet underground with no ladder to reach a patch, 10 gallons of water, no food, no light, just oxygen and his own thought. Magneto and the Red Skull are iconic, but no one is as iconic as Dr. Doom. In the beginning of his comic book life, Doom wanted nothing more than to save his mom from the hold of Mephisto. Once a year, every single year, Doom would challenge Mephisto for the fate of his mother's soul, but he almost always lost until 1989 when he teamed up with Doctor Strange in Triumph and Torment. Shortly after their arrival in Hell, the Doctors began to realize that they don't stand a chance at winning at all. When the two became separated, Mephisto makes Doom an offer: Doctor Strange's soul in exchange for his mother's, a deal that Doom accepts. Dr. Doom captures Strange and goes to complete the deal, but after Doom's mom became so offended that her son would sell the Sorcerer Supreme just to save her soul, she refused to be freed, and that's when Dr. Doom's real plan could kick in. Thanks to his mother's pure act and a gadget that Doom slipped into Doctor Strange's cloak, the Sorcerer Supreme was able to use the power of Cynthia Von Doom's pure act to wound Mephisto and free both himself and Victor's mom, and the three of them escaped. Doom did like a double betrayal, tricking Mephisto, who is the master of tricking people. It's awesome.
Reinventing a character isn't just something the writers do. Sometimes the characters make that choice all on their own. This is the case of Paste Pot Pete, later known as the Trapster. His OG name came from an invention of his, a multi-polymer adhesive, or simply put, it's just like really sticky glue and sticky paste. The paste was very popular and the guy made a lot of money, but he wanted more. Believing a life of crime would add more green to his pocket, he turned to the dark side. It technically did add a lot of green to his pocket. He wears a fabulous green jumpsuit with a white collar. The details of the fit are a matching purple nightcap and a big purple bow right on his neck. And then of course, his bucket of paste he carries around with his weapon of choice connected. It's something called a paste gun. It's basically an extreme glue gun. Now, he did make make a bit of green in the money sense as well. He successfully robbed a bank and even stole a missile, but before he could sell that off, he was bested by the Human Torch. This causes a lifelong rivalry. Pete even runs into Spider-Man later on in Spider-Man Human Torch issue 1. Spider-Man gets a very good laugh out of Pete's name, much to Pete's annoyance. This is actually the reason Pete changed his name. It literally says on panel, "That's it, I'm changing my name." And he picked Trapster to sound more menacing. The later versions of his costume have upgraded him from having to carry around the massive paste bucket, and instead it flows through a chest piece. His Trapster version changed up his colors, now red and yellow with a backpack that contains the glue. Polka Dot Man is kind of similar to Spectro that we saw in part 1, but is more of a twister board because he has a white suit covered in multicolored dots. He has a red belt at the waist with a circle in the middle and a red mask over his eyes. The dots on his suit are very special. Each one can transform into a specific weapon or gadget when he removes it. So he tears off a dot, that's the equivalent of getting punched in the face. Another is a buzzsaw. His suit is electrically powered, but when he can't access the electricity, he resorts to using a baseball bat. His crime planning method is pretty clever. One time he went on a crime spree around Gotham, and the points on the map turned out to be a big connect the dots picture of a stickman. I'm not the only person who loved this. It's implied that the citizens of Gotham were also big fans, and Polka Dot became a local celebrity, possibly even appearing on local talk shows. He's been featured in Batman the Brave and the Bold, the Lego Batman movie, and the Suicide Squad. The Ringmaster's main power is hypnosis, and he's good at it. I am hypnotized by his outfit. Here's the thing. All the components when they are separate look nice. It's just when they get put together that I am raising an eyebrow. He's got these nice purple pants and a matching tie, a green jacket with black stars all over it, a purple top hat with the circle swirly hypnosis thing in it, and green boots with black stars to match. His boots are nice. I would wear them. A statement boot like that is back in style. Ringmaster leads a criminal organization called the Circus of Crime. Shocking. The crime is he uses the hypnosis device on his hat to gain control of his audiences and then make them give him all their money. He's fought Spider-Man, Daredevil, and the Hulk. In a fight with Spider-Man and Daredevil, Spider-Man gets hypnotized and put under the Ringmaster's control. It is during this fight that we learn that the way to defeat the Ringmaster's mind control is to just knock his hat off, and from what I can tell in the photos, he doesn't have a chin strap or anything, so he seems pretty easy to stop if you really tried. If I were him, I would just add a chin strap. Up next is the musical mastermind that is Clarinetto. He is part of the parody series The Powerful Pachyderms. Clarinetto initially poses as a music teacher, but he reveals himself to be the former head of the Brotherhood of Evil Musicians. The former job reveal also comes with a costume reveal, of course. He dons a red and purple helmet with 2 music notes on top, a red band uniform, and matching purple boots and cape. The star of the show, though, is his clarinet, which has the power to control guitar strings when he plays it. Similar to Snake Charming, but weirder. Clarinetto was teaching a group of students. He wasn't really teaching them music, and more teaching them to be celebrity impersonator fighting squads. He and his impersonators are eventually defeated by the Elephant Squad through a powerful energy blast. This entire issue is so fun, it's so ridiculous, and not meant to be taken seriously, and if I could sit in on any writer's room, it would have been this one. The Doom Patrol comics have produced some interesting characters like Beard Hunter. The first version of Beard Hunter is just a regular guy, as regular as one can be when you're a highly trained hitman. Regular might not be the word for this guy, because he is jealous of anyone who can grow a beard and therefore wants to off them and steal their beard. His spoils from the hits are then worn around his waist. He also has a skull on his chest with a beard pinned to it like a brooch. It's a look. Beard Hunter can't grow his own beard, as he has a hormone deficiency. Because of the skull detail on his chest, many people think that Beard Hunter is a parody of the Punisher. His original suit from the 1991 comic is all red, and he has this army green backpack to hold his weapons. Beard Hunter is featured in the live-action Doom Patrol show, and this version is somehow even weirder. He has actual superpowers. He is able to find his victims, no matter where they are, by consuming a piece of their beard trimmings. My favorite fact I learned about him, in the final pages of his debut comic Doom Patrol 2 number 45, he gets electrocuted on tinfoil, and it's so bad that he nearly passes out. Nearly. What makes him actually pass out is when 3 heavenly visitors come to him and he remembers God has a beard. Batman inspires people. On today's list, he has inspired some truly wacky individuals. Signal Man is just another great example. He started out as Phil Cobb, a little guy in terms of Gotham's massive crime scene. He was determined to become a big Bat Batman level problem, and he figured the best and easiest way to do so was to have an extremely specific gimmick. Judging from the likes of Batman villains on this list already, he's onto something. Signalman first debuted in 1957. This version of him has a yellow cape covered in green shapes and symbols, there are moons and swirls and even some stuff from the Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System. He wears striped shorts that are very similar to caution tape, and the rest of his suit is red. The whole signal idea came from the bat signal and how much of modern society is run by signals in general. There was also a brief period in 1961 where he viewed Signalman to be a failure, so he changed his name to Blue Bowman, inspired by the Green Arrow. That didn't work out either, and he was sent straight to jail and not seen until 1976 when he made a comeback in Detective Comics 466 back as Signalman. He is just a guy, he has no superpowers, but he does carry around a knockout gas gun, and his belt has tech that can change any signal he encounters. The Highwayman of the US 1 comic series is so interesting. The story may be about intergalactic truckers, but it's hard to ignore the fashion choice that is Demon Cowboy Trucker. To be clear though, I am obsessed. This villain used to be a regular guy, Jefferson Archer, brother to the hero of US 1, Ulysses Archer. Jefferson was a trucker on Earth, but as he got older, he wasn't able to drive as long in between sleeping periods, so he was losing out on work to younger drivers. He didn't like this and tried a bunch of different, not always safe, methods of staying awake, until he finally just decided to sell his soul to a demon. Which I love the implications of this, because he didn't sell his soul to become a billionaire, he sold his soul to work forever, which means he loves his job, and I love that for him. The demon took away his capacity for fear, and he doesn't need to sleep anymore, but every time he uses the inhuman tactics, he becomes more demonic. The first version of him from the 1983 comic is pretty tame, just a guy in some pants, a sweater, and a long billowing cape. The wilder versions of him come later. In 2009's Ghost Rider Volume 6, he is pictured with a red eye, the other covered by an eye patch. His skin is deathly pale, and he is wearing a full fab red and black cowboy ensemble. I actually really like this one, and it's what I based my outfit on today. For Doom Patrol villains, it seems like a lot of the characters start out with an unserious, satirical, or just ridiculous premise, and then the writers take that and come up with a serious, genuine backstory to justify the choice. We saw this earlier with Beard Hunter, and we will see it again now with Cod Piece. The creator of Cod Piece, Rachel Pollack, was asked to do a one-shot for the Doom Patrol series, and she got creative and pulled from a hero, Green Arrow. She said during an interview with Fortress Comics that she was intrigued by the idea of Green Arrow's single quiver holding dozens of different types of arrows, and thought the absurdity of that would make a great parody villain. The adult themes in Doom Patrol then inspired the stroke of genius that was Cod Piece, because that is a real accessory that has been used by men for hundreds of years for the same area as Cod Piece's weapon. A modern version of a Cod Piece that is used nowadays would be sports protective equipment. The rest of Cod Piece's outfit is pretty normal as far as villain outfits go. It's just the multi-use weapon on his lower half that is wild. The thing has lots of features. Most interesting to me is the retractable boxing gloves. Cod Piece's serious backstory to justify him wearing this is one time a girl told him she didn't want to go out with him because he was short, and he is not the sharpest fork in the drawer, so he assumed she must have been talking about something on his lower half.
Starting off with a very unexpected twist, none of us were entirely sure if Catwoman and Batman were ever going to be allowed to end up together permanently in the main continuity. But when the wedding of the two characters was announced, that seemed exactly what we would actually be getting, which we were pretty hyped about. Of course, in the end, Selena did decide to play the role of runaway bride and break off the engagement, leaving a letter for Bruce. But while that was also surprising, the real twist was actually in finding out that Catwoman ditching Batman at the altar was all a part of a larger plan belonging to Bane. And even worse, Holly Robinson, Selena's good friend, was actually in on this plot. Bane had returned to Gotham, planning this time to break Batman's mind and his heart instead of just his body. Next up, this has to be one of the most shocking twists of all time in the comics, and it comes to us from Marvel. What twist surprised you the most? See if you can guess what this next one I'm about to share is. Hint, it's from Marvel. That's what you know. Put those guesses in the comments now. Let me know your thoughts as well. The Thunderbolts were a team that upon their first appearance were shrouded in mystery. They appeared to be a team of largely unknown heroes who were being set up to become a new premier superhero team in Marvel Comics, kind of akin to the Avengers. Somehow Marvel managed to keep the truth of their identity a secret until the release of their very first issue. In Thunderbolts issue number 1, at the very end it's actually revealed that this team of new heroes aren't actually heroes at all, but instead are villains. Specifically, the Masters of Evil evil team as led by Citizen V, who of course is really Baron Helmut Zemo. The plan here was to pose as heroes and basically slowly use their influence and adoration to conquer the world. A reveal made even more impactful when you consider these were the same villains who had actually almost killed members of the Avengers team in their attack on Avengers Mansion about a decade prior.
Marvel creates some interesting characters, like an elf hitman. His name is Melf, M-E-L-F, but his alias is Elf with a Gun, and that's it, that's what he is. It seems that he's part of a bigger group, Elves with Guns. We don't know where he's from officially, but the Elves with Guns are agents for the Tribunals, a force dedicated to preserving order in the universe. Melf was a weird guy. He would go around offing random people and he was never caught. He was only stopped because he was run over by a truck. His nephew Ralph then took up his undisclosed mission. However, if we look at him like he was working for the Tribunals, then maybe his victims weren't as random. This would be a great and easy to follow explanation for everything, which is why it has been disproven. Turns out the Tribunals were fake, and we are once again back to wondering why a killer elf was roaming the streets. The Phantom Stranger has led a lot of lives, literally. One might be canon now, but it's only a matter of time before someone else grabs a pen and messes with his history. His current origin in the New 52 story is that he was Judas, betrayer of Jesus, and that makes him one of the greatest sinners that has ever lived. Another is that he was a fallen angel who didn't pick a side during the Heavenly War. Another is that he was Isaac from the Bible story. Not exactly the same though. This time his son died because King Herod was looking for Jesus, and now Isaac hates Jesus and later him. Another is that he was spared during biblical times but didn't want to be, but the angels didn't want to let him in heaven, so he has to walk the earth alone forever. And the fourth is that he was actually one of the last remaining parts of our previous universe. At the final curtain, he approaches those studying the end and passes a part of himself onto a new person, so when the universe is reborn, they get a Phantom Stranger too. In addition to his many backstories, it is also up in the air as to whether or not he is a villain. To me, I think he started out as a villain. He did betray Jesus in at least a few of these, but later realized the error of his ways and became a sort of hero. Lots of people just choose to ignore many New 52 storylines, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see what sticks for Phantom. Phantom Stranger is now connected to a villain called Question, but that wasn't always the case. Question at one point was a character that was thought to be a supernatural power, thought to be because it was never made clear. One of the only things that is now considered canon about him is that he has committed a crime bad enough to be considered one of 3 of the world's greatest sinners, part of the trio of sin with Phantom. We never know this guy's name. Before being turned into Question, the guy was obsessed with power and having his name feared by all. As his punishment, he got his face taken away and he can no longer remember himself or his name. This was introduced in the New 52. Before that, he was just an alter ego of Vic Sage, but then Flashpoint caused them to separate and even have a brand new different history thing going on. This version of him isn't that bad, he just really wants to know who he is. He also shares a name with a Taylor Swift song. It's all very confusing. I am hoping that we will eventually get a name reveal out of him, whether he's another universe version of an existing Marvel villain, or if he's really a historical figure. Identity theft and retcons have led to quite a confusing backstory for Zorn. Zorn's debut was in New X-Men Annual 2001, and at the end, he was revealed to be Magneto in disguise. Only he wasn't. Later it was revealed that it was actually Zorn pretending to be Magneto, pretending to be Zorn, and Zorn was being controlled by someone named Sublime to foster mutant hatred in the world. Easy to follow. At the end of the Magneto identity theft fight, Zorn dies, but not really. His body is done for, but his essence was still around through his connection to Sublime, so he came back. The creator of Zorn in 2001 always intended for Zorn to be Magneto, actually Magneto, so when you read the story, there are hints to it the whole way through. It was because the editors liked Zorn's character, and Marvel wanted Magneto alive so they could use him again, that the confusing aspect of his story was born. Zorn also has a twin brother with very similar powers to him, so sometimes Zorn returns, but it's Zorn 1, or it's not Zorn 1, and it's actually Zorn 2. It's a whole thing. Della, Dent's origin is confusing because she wants it to be. She is a pathological liar when it comes to her family tree. She is claimed to be the daughter of the Joker, Catwoman, the Riddler, the Penguin, Scarecrow, and Two-Face, and even more. She was first introduced as the Joker's daughter, but her last name is Dent, the same name belonging to Harvey Dent, or Two-Face. So now she She is known as Two-Face's daughter for a while, until Robin figures out she's not the right age to be his daughter. She agrees and then just disappears. She appeared in the Teen Titans comic series, and she was planned to be revealed as a time traveler that gets reality warped one too many times and is driven insane. Unfortunately, we never got to see this as the comics were cancelled. Technically, Della doesn't want to be a villain, but she does fight a lot of heroes and lies all the time. She was later revealed to actually legit be the daughter of another universe Joker and Three-Face, a female variation of Two-Face. Is this a lie? Maybe. You can literally never know what's real in these universes anymore. Turns out, neither can Della. It's suggested that because her mind was warped so much, every time she switched Earths, her consciousness switches slightly as well, which is why she's named so many different parents. She was just confused. The Joker is one of the most iconic villains of all time, so it's no wonder so many people want to leave their mark on his story. Unfortunately, that makes for a pretty messed up, twisted, confusing history. One thing is common: he ends up in acid and comes out looking like that. Who he was before, and even during the swim, is up to whoever is holding the pen. In 1951's Detective Comics 168, the Joker had been the Red Hood, also a criminal, and one night he decided to rob a factory. He escaped by swimming through the pool of chemical wastes, and I genuinely think he thought he would come out normal. He didn't, and to his delight figured out his new look was scary and used it to his advantage. In later versions, like The Killing Joke in 1988, he is a failing comedian and once again finds himself in the chemical factory, but this time he gets scared into the acid. In Batman the Animated Series, he was a hitman first. In the very recent and Oscar-worthy interpretation from Joaquin Phoenix is that he didn't fall in the acid yet. His look is just makeup and he has a neurological disorder that makes him randomly laugh. There is another movie coming up with Lady Gaga as Harley, so maybe the acid will make an appearance then too. Time for the big guy, the MCU's newest big bad wolf and my never-ending headache, Kang the Conqueror. One thing seems to generally stay consistent: every version of Kang starts out as Nathaniel Richards. Where Nathaniel comes from? We have options. There was a Nathaniel from Earth 616 that brought peace to Earth 6311 when he traveled there. This made him a big deal. He was known as the legendary benefactor, but he wasn't the Nathaniel native to the planet, so another Nathaniel was eventually born. This Nathaniel was maybe descended from the great benefactor himself, or Dr. Doom. This Nathaniel's history was messed up by another him, causing him to be a good guy for a while. Nathaniel grows up and is bored, so he travels back in time to Earth 616's ancient Egypt. His plans? Be king. Eventually he tries to return home after losing some fights, but is caught in a time storm and transported ahead to the 40th century Earth 6311. The future is a mess, they are at war again, and the people have regressed into barbarians. Nathaniel has found the perfect group to take over. This is the first time he takes on the name Kang the Conqueror. He took his name and ran, conquering Earth 6311, that galaxy, and then trying to attack Earth 616. He wanted more power, but there was also a historical record that said that eventually a celestial Madonna was going to give birth to the most powerful entity ever, and Kang wanted to be their dad. This was the confusing origin of one version of Kang, but generally considered to be the base Kang kind of. There are so many versions of him under a variety of names: Nathaniel, Kang, Immortus, Scarlet Centurion, Victor Timely, Mr. Griffin, Prime Kang, and Kang the Conglomerator.
Iron Man being revealed as a sleeper agent for Kang was really unexpected, because it was about as random as it sounds. How? When? Why? These are all questions that folks had at the time, and not all of them were satisfactorily answered. This was because the story had moments where it even contradicted itself. If you want to check it out, at your own peril of course, you can find it as part of the Crossing event. There are moments after the reveal where even Iron Man himself seems to struggle to remember that he is actually one of the bad guys here. It was a twist even he never expected, I imagine. But I guess if you are a sleeper agent, that makes sense. You wouldn't expect it because you never knew that you were evil. It was deep, it was repressed. Technically, he wasn't working for Kang directly, but instead he'd been influenced by Immortus, who is an alternate timeline version of Kang the Conqueror. Not a sleeper agent, but a person we weren't expecting to secretly be a villain, I'll say that much. This next point also involves a hero that wasn't really what he seemed. Although unlike Iron Man, his history as a hero wasn't as established or well known in the comics. He was quite a bit more mysterious. So maybe we should have expected this. Baphomet is a hero who ends up befriending Batman, even becoming so trustworthy of an ally that Bruce reveals his true face to Baphomet and even brings him to the Batcave. This ended up being a mistake on Batman's part, as Baphomet used this opportunity to drop his disguise so he could attack and kill the woman Bruce loved the most at the time, his fiancée, Silver St. Cloud, revealing himself to not truly be the hero Baphomet, but instead the villain Automatopoeia. Another villain plot twist that I know I personally was not expecting comes from the Batman camp. It's pretty twisted though, because Joker this time around doesn't actually target Batman or Gotham, but instead sets his sights on an even more godlike hero, Superman, and his city of Metropolis. What Joker was thinking here, I honestly have no idea. I don't know how he thought he could just come out of this attack if it was successful, especially alive, but maybe that was all part of his plan. Maybe he didn't expect nor want to come out alive. Well, he certainly didn't end up doing that, I'll tell you that much. In the Injustice reality, Joker and Harley Quinn team up to trick Superman into thinking Doomsday has returned. This causes Superman to go into a paranoid rage, fighting against Doomsday, who is later revealed to have been actually Lois. Oh no. But Superman was simply made to hallucinate Lois as Doomsday, which is how this all happened. In addition, Joker and Harley use this distraction to blow up Metropolis, causing Superman to kill Joker during his interrogation and renounce his former peaceful ways, becoming a superhero dictator who refuses to tolerate the state of the world any longer, basically forcing it into a totalitarian time of peace. And if you thought that last one was unbelievable, wait till you hear about this twist. You'd think when you've lost your face and then you've been thrown into basically a bottomless pit, that would be the end for you as a character. But apparently, that's just not the case if you're the Joker, who honestly survives a lot of stuff for being just a human guy. How did this happen? Well, it has to do with the fact that the pit the Joker falls into happens to end in a small pool of water that's really a liquid metal known as Dionysium. The same kind of liquid metal used in Lazarus pits, and that is tied to Vandal Savage's powers. The Dionysium Joker fell into saved his life, healing his face and giving him somewhat of a healing factor for a while anyways. This was how Joker was able to return in the Endgame story, not to be confused with the MCU Endgame, which is a completely different thing altogether, in case you were wondering. While Joker may have some surprising tricks up his sleeve, he doesn't have anything on this next villain's surprising twist. If anyone is going to do anything to surprise us, of course, it's gotta be Loki. Loki has long been known as the god of tricks, and even though he's now known as the god of stories, that doesn't mean he hasn't done some crazy stuff in the past, and that he won't do some crazy stuff in the future. I'm sure he will. One of the craziest things he's ever done? Pretend to be the Scarlet Witch. Yeah, this was around a time when Loki had actually adopted a female form, and Wanda was actually missing, so both of those things made it easy for Loki to impersonate the powerful Avenger. Eventually, however, Loki's trickery was exposed, and the Avengers and Young Avengers work together to defeat the trickster god. That just goes to show you that not every hero or villain is what they seem, and the same could be said of this next villain. Hush was a mysterious character in the comics who we didn't know too much about when he first appeared. Initially, it seemed as though Jason Todd might somehow be the man under the mask. Actually, that was the original intention for this character's origin, fun fact, as we did see him as Jason, but then of course that was later kind of retconned that it was actually Clayface working at the behest of the real Hush to mess with Batman, and that's why he looked like Jason, and Jason was still dead. In fact, Hush was instead someone else. Not Jason, someone completely new. Or well, new to us, but an old friend to Bruce Wayne, Thomas Elliot, Bruce's childhood, basically best friend. His best friend also decided to kill his parents after Bruce lost his own, just so he could better relate to him. Yeah, Tommy was that guy. Basically like Bruce, but more psychotic, giving even the new frenemy Ghostmaker a run for his money, to be honest. Ghostmaker has nothing on Hush, you know what I mean? Hush is nuts. Next up, another surprise reveal in regards to a villain's past relationships. In this case, not a friendship, but did you know that Apocalypse had a family? Yeah. He's got a family. This was not on my Krakoa Revelation bingo card, but then again, it was also through the Krakoan era that I learned Apocalypse had a magical origin, which I also wasn't expecting to learn about, but there you go. It was a great time of reinvention for the character of Apocalypse, especially in seeing him work alongside many mutants who for years we'd seen him actively fight against. We saw him in the entirely new role of sort of mutant savior, and I personally was waiting for him to just reveal his true colors and turn traitor, but he didn't. In fact, we also learned by revisiting his origins the motivation for Apocalypse kinda seeking out other mutants, other than just survival of the fittest, ruling the world, blah blah blah. How he'd been from Araco, originally Okara, when merged with the island of Krakoa, and how he'd been searching for a means to rescue his fellow mutants there, his people, who his wife, Genesis, led. Not only that, but Apocalypse and Genesis had a family together, with his children actually being his first horsemen. Literally, their names are War, Pestilence, Death, and Famine. Imagine growing up with any of those names. Imagine that being your name. Instead of me being like, hi, I'm Amanda, I'm just like, hi, I'm Pestilence. That's gonna shape you into the way you are. I'm not surprised these characters look how they do. Origin shifting is of course always surprising, whether it's for a villain or a hero. Barbatos is an interesting villain in the Batman mythos, especially when you consider that the Bat God has claimed to have created Batman from basically the ground up. He's claimed to be the bat that inspired a young Bruce, and even claimed to be the one behind orchestrating the death of Bruce's parents. According to Barbatos, this was all done as part of his plan to make Bruce secretly one of his own agents. Even though Bruce didn't know about this, or initially about Barbatos and the Dark Multiverse's existence. Of course, Bruce refused to give in to Barbatos' whims and did his best to resist him, but at the end of the day, Barbatos was still extremely successful across the Dark Multiverse, even still. Speaking of villains who like to claim responsibility for evil deeds in retrospect, enter Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom and Scarlet Witch are a pair that most people never would have thought would come together, and yet they did, and they have in the past. As shocking as this couple was, what was even more surprising was how much it seemingly kinda worked. Of course, this was in large part because Scarlet Witch was suffering from memory loss at the time. However, even after Wanda got her memories restored to her, she seemingly expressed an interest in making things kind of work with Doom, or at least, you know, trying to be there for him. Like, she definitely showed mercy towards him. But after Doom attempted to betray her and was caught in the act, he instead chose to claim that none of it had been real, and even for some reason took credit for the events of basically M-Day. Still waiting on an explanation for that one in the comics, unless it's just that, as I imagine, Doom is saving face for his ego here. Like, he's like, you think you do stuff, I do everything, I'm Doom. Don't look at me, I'm sensitive. I know inside Doctor Doom is a very sensitive person. I get that from him when I read comics featuring him. Oh, Victor. Some things in comics are seemingly made to never be explained or recovered, like our next point, Jason Todd, who was once known as one of those characters that was undoubtedly always to be permanently dead, meant to remain as a permanent mark of loss for Batman. This was a guy who was never ever expected to come back to life. It used to be a sacred 3 that basically encompassed a sense of permanent loss in the comics. After all, in a medium where the world feels like it's constantly at stake again and again, we need to have some permanent loss here, right? For the most part in comics, loss is something we don't expect to ever see permanently because so many other characters refuse to stay dead. Heroes and villains, and in some cases even civilians alike. I mean, that's what happens when you have a hero story and it's that cyclical, you know? People die, they come back to life, they die, they come back to life. The sacred 3 here though was Uncle Ben, Spider-Man's long dead uncle, Bucky Barnes, Captain America's long lost sidekick, and Jason Todd, Batman's long mourned Robin. So you can imagine the surprise when Jason Todd showed back up, not just as Batman's Robin either, but instead returning as something completely new, something else, a new seeming villain, or at the very least antagonist who went by the name of Red Hood. When characters change into something we weren't expecting, it catches us off guard, and this next one is another great example of that. I think for many of us this was one of the most shocking and surprising reveals we had ever seen or read. This is because Invincible is an amazing series that really does play on the tropes and expectations we have when it comes to the superhero genre and the characters within it, and the archetypes within it. Omni-Man is a character we are introduced to in season 1 as a hero, one of the Earth's greatest heroes. Sure, he doesn't really belong to a team and prefers to stay separate from the Guardians of the Globe, but it seems irrefutable, at the beginning of episode 1 anyways, that he's, you know, a good guy. He still helps out the Guardians and acts in the way we expect a hero to. All of our expectations and ideas of him though are shattered when we see him go up against the Guardians and basically slaughter them. Everything we thought we knew about Omni-Man is questioned in this moment, and the realization dawns on the viewer and the reader that this is not going to be your typical superhero story, which is also why we love it.
Coming home to your secret cave and or manor, only to find Bane, a hulking behemoth of a man, waiting to greet you. That would be terrifying, and that is exactly what happens in Batman number 497. Bane had organized a prison breakout in a secret attempt, sort of, to exhaust the Batman, to wind him down and break him down. So now, when this worn down, caught off guard Batman watches as Bane pumps himself full of venom, the very thing that Bruce is also suffering withdrawals from, and is talking about how Bruce Wayne is just a mask, but a useless one, but his mask is very much useful, and then he's like, so you are familiar with venom, then you know what it can do. And he explains how his venom is way more potent, and then Batman gets a bit of a good speech, I'll give him that, it was pretty good, and he jumps into combat, and Bane's just nope, and he gives Batman an absolute thrashing. He's throwing Batman around and beating the tar out of the guy, and Batman is reliving all of his beatings up until this point, but they're nothing like this, and Alfred literally can't even handle it, and he goes crawling off to get the Bat family, and Batman is so exhausted that he can only try to dodge or just take the hits, but he goes to punch Bane, and it's nothing, and then Bane's you are already broken, and then Bane just wipes the floor, the ceilings, the walls with Bruce Wayne, breaks his back, and then he leaves him destroyed on the ground. It's sick, and it's sick and twisted, but it's awesome. Next up today, the Wolverine villain Cyber is, in my opinion, kind of underrated, but he's one of the only villains to actually terrify the mutant, with some adamantium-coated skin, toxic claws, and the power to track an individual's brain. Oh, and he's 9 feet tall and massive. In 1994's Wolverine number 79, Cyber is tracking down Wolverine in order to claim his adamantium bones, which he wants to then make a profit from. Unfortunately, at this time, Wolverine actually doesn't have the adamantium fused to his bones. So when the fight leads to him popping his bone claws, Cyber is a little bit disappointed. But instead of just walking away after this revelation, a cannon goes off nearby, and this gives Wolverine the opportunity to slash Cyber across the face. But as soon as the attack happens, Cyber catches Wolverine's fist, and in one stomp, he snaps Wolverine's claws in half. This event scarred Wolverine, but right after it, even made him question his ability as a hero without his adamantium.
Speaking of destructive villains, Galactus is known for being a destroyer on a much greater scale, I would say, than the Joker. He's a world destroyer, and the last thing I'd ever expect to see him doing is creating life. Hence why this twist involving him was so surprising. It wasn't your typical villain twist either, as it didn't have to do with him tricking someone or devising the end of a planet or a universe. It was actually kind of just the opposite. This Galactus, of course, was an alternate version who was basically forced back into an egg to incubate for longer than he had when he became Galactus, when Galen became Galactus. It was suggested that this was why Galactus was a destroyer, because he basically just wasn't fully cooked when he came into the world. So that's why he ended up being a bad guy. Kind of like a Pandora's box scenario, you know? You open Pandora's box and all the bad stuff comes out, but then you close it because you're scared. But really, you should have just kept that open for longer because there was good stuff underneath. The plan worked, and after a little bit of extra time in his egg, Galactus instead emerged not as the world devourer, but instead as the Lifebringer, a creator of worlds instead of a destroyer and devourer of them. Moving on, Grail recently made a surprising reappearance in the comics. We haven't seen her for a while, and she is one of my favorite Wonder Woman villains. She's the daughter of an Amazon assassin, Myrna, and new god, Darkseid. She's pretty epic. She's basically like the opposite of Wonder Woman. While she is a great Wonder Woman villain, it was pretty cool and unexpected to see her agree to work with other fellow Wonder Woman villains at the behest of the Sovereign and the United States. And if you want to catch more Grail action, you gotta go check out the new Wonder Woman series, Wonder Woman from 2023 by Tom King. It's really good. At least so I hear. I hear it's really good. Everything that I've seen in it looks really good. I gotta add it to my pull list, and I gotta catch up and read all of it. While Khonshu has never particularly been known as the most gracious, kindest, or compassionate of gods, he is usually an ally to Moon Knight. And while Moon Knight isn't always a perfect cookie-cutter hero, he he is ultimately a hero, except for this time around. That's because Khonshu made Mark into an antagonist when he sought to defeat Mephisto, who he claimed was basically attempting to take over the Earth. So he was like, Mark, you gotta help me, we gotta beat Mephisto, just trust me. The problem was that Khonshu got Mark to gather the Avengers' weapons and items of power, hoping to use them to defeat Mephisto, so that he could basically rule Earth himself. Next up, one of my favorite reveals of all time, especially in regards to the MCU, not only because it was fairly unexpected, even as someone who has a pretty good handle on who Agatha Harkness is and what she's capable of, but because it has to be the catchiest villain reveal ever. While we all had many theories for who was the great villain in WandaVision, other than maybe Wanda herself to an extent, other theories were simply just more popular than Agatha being the one behind it all. I mean, we all knew it was probably Agatha Harkness there, we all knew that, but to think that she was the mastermind, not a lot of us were expecting that, to be fair. Agatha, while sometimes a villain, is more well known as an ally in the comics, so for it to be revealed that she was actually the one behind it, that it had been Agatha all along, that caught us by surprise. Over at DC Comics, we have another usually ally who instead was revealed to be a villain. Perhaps not the whole time, but definitely upon his return. Jason Todd was a character that we never expected to see again, so his coming back at all was pretty shocking. For a while there, it was implied that Jason would be Hush, and in fact, that was the initial intention for the Hush reveal in the comics. Fun fact. And this might have been one of the few indications to fans that DC Comics was maybe thinking about planning his return. Jason Todd came back to Batman's world not as a former ally and Robin, but instead as just the opposite, a villain, who blamed Batman for the fact that the man who nearly killed him was still on the loose. Of course, that man being the Joker. As such, Jason Todd had a different approach to vigilantism once he returned that made him a villain at the start, and more of an anti-hero, I'd say, as he's evolved. Heroes becoming villains is one thing, but what about when villains become heroes? Or disguising themselves as heroes, at least. When it comes to Spider-Man alternates, we have a lot of them, it's true. But one that I would have never expected to see is a version of Spider-Man who was a straight up villain. Or, scratch that, a version of Spider-Man who was just straight up one of his most iconic villains, Dr. Octopus. But that is what we got with this story arc. Doc Ock's body was failing and he managed to convince Peter to visit him before he shuffled off this mortal coil. However, this of course was a trap, and Otto used this opportunity to swap bodies with the young Spider-Man. As a result, Spider-Man's mind ended up in Doc Ock's failing body, and Doc Ock's mind ended up in Peter's much younger and powerful one. Surprise, surprise. This was how Dr. Octopus was able to defeat death, but tragically, Spider-Man actually did end up dying here, even more surprising. Or at least he died at the time. His consciousness would actually still live on somewhat, as it existed to some extent within his body, and later on, Otto would relinquish Spider-Man's body back to the consciousness of Peter, which was left remaining inside his physical form. Basically got stronger as time went on, and then eventually Otto was like, you know what? Maybe you should just be you, and I'll just be me. We'll just go our separate ways. Superior Spider-Man, out. Not quite as dramatic as a body swap, but still pretty dramatic. I really love this next one. And I think for many of us, this twist caught us completely by surprise. Might be the most twisty reveal we've ever had. In fact, this twist and character became so iconic that she made her way from the animated universe to the comic book one. Yeah. Have you guessed it yet? Yeah, I'm talking about Andrea Beaumont, and the reveal that she was actually the Batman antagonist, Phantasm. Andrea Beaumont was introduced to us as one of Bruce's old flames, who he actually almost ended up settling down with back in the day. She knew Bruce better than most others, which that is also what made it such a great and compelling reveal and twist, because it also then kind of made sense that Phantasm was such a great foil for Batman, because she was someone that knew Bruce so well, so kind of works out, kind of makes sense.
First, let's talk about Swordsman. The Swordsman is one of the most badass and underrated villains to ever join the Avengers. The story of how the Swordsman joined the team is so crazy because the dude basically bullied his way onto the team. You see, the Swordsman already had an extensive resume as a villain before he decided he wanted to become an Avenger, and he didn't really do it because he was remorseful for his past actions or anything like that. In fact, he only wanted to join the team because he was secretly in cahoots with the Mandarin and was set on infiltrating the team. But instead of pretending to be nice and putting on a sorry face, he actually just did what he does best, throwing down with the Avengers and beating up everybody, even threatening to throw Cap over the edge of the building, basically bullying the Avengers into letting him join. That's right, this dude strong-armed his way onto the Avengers team. Now it's surprising that nobody really knows about the swordsman because he's just truly badass, but once he joined the team, however, his intentions changed and he finally did have that change of heart after realizing that the Avengers are actually pretty decent. So instead of committing to the betrayal of the Avengers, he just hightailed it out of there. Now fast forward 8 years and guess who's back on the scene? The swordsman, now with a legit invitation to join the Earth's mightiest heroes. If there's any villain who earned his spot on the team, it's definitely this guy. Next, let's talk about Sabretooth, who's well known as one of the most brutally animalistic villains to have ever walked the Earth. But all of that changed thanks to the Axis event, a spell which flipped the moralities of heroes and villains. Now, Sabretooth had joined the heroes' ranks before, but this was the very first time he did so with genuine intentions of doing good, embracing a heroic role and aligning himself with the Avengers' cause. Now, unlike most villains who went back to their usual ways once the spell was over, the morality inverting effects actually didn't fade away for Sabretooth. He continued as a changed character, now an integral part of the Avengers Unity division. Unfortunately though, his heroic nature wouldn't last forever, as he became evil once again after sacrificing himself to revive his son. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. Next up is Dr. Octopus. There have been a slew of villains who have joined the Avengers under the guise of a hero while secretly harboring evil intentions, but Dr. Otto Octavius stands out as one of the very few villains who genuinely wanted to do some good as a hero, joining the Avengers while he was secretly in control of Spider-Man's body during the whole Superior Spider-Man arc. Now, while he did try his best at being a better Spider-Man than Peter Parker ever was, deep down, at the end of the day, he was still the arrogant and rage-filled Doc Ock, and so he tended to take things way too far, like that time he straight up punched the Scorpion's jaw clean off, or his tendency to not really care about ending the lives of his villains to keep them down. This Spider-Man was a much more lethal version than most we've ever seen. Now, Doc Ock's stint as Spidey didn't last forever, however, as a sliver of Peter's consciousness still resided in his mind and fought desperately to take his body back. Eventually, after a humbling moment where he realized he wasn't a better Spider-Man, he sacrificed himself so that Peter Parker could return. Next is Vernaki.
Look, I'm gonna be real with you about this next one. I don't know all of Umar's relationship history, as she doesn't appear as often as a villain as her brother Dormammu does, and I feel like she doesn't get into all of it as much, but I'm just going to guess that she has a long list of people she has been attached to, just based on what I do know, what she has told us of her relationship history. Even if we don't fully know about all of these people yet, I think there are more that exist than we know of. Why do I think this? Because of the way Umar ogled and treated the Hulk, and during that interaction, her reference to her extensive experience in regards to the intimacy department. What we also do know is that Umar had Cleo with Orny and was at one point married to Tyboro, so, you know, we at least got 3 people there, and just like I said, her energy gives me that vibe. I would not have expected to include this next villain on a list like this, but he actually has so many children, and I'm pretty sure all, or if not all, at least most of them have actually different moms. We're talking about the one, the only, the new god, Darkseid. I just introduced him like he was about to jump into a wrestling match, which might be appropriate in some ways. After all, Darkseid may have been in quite a few wrestling matches of a certain nature, if you catch my meaning. Darkseid has been romantically attached to Sully, his one great love, and he's also been intimately linked to Tigra, Myrna, and in what I hope was an Elseworld story, Granny Goodness. Yeah, that was messed up for so many reasons. Someone else that might be a surprising addition for you, Lex Luthor. Surprisingly, Lex is very much a ladies' man in the comics. There are a lot of people he's been attached to over the years. I mean, I guess it makes sense. He is insanely smart, and he's also a billionaire or a millionaire. I think he's a billionaire at this point. Sure, he's a villain, but he's also an intellectual. And even as a villain, Lex often does what he does because he thinks it's the right move. He thinks he's actually helping people, even though he's a villain. You know what I mean? At least in the modern day comics, he's not, like, I would say, as petty in his villainy. Or, you know, he's less petty than he was during the Golden Age anyway. Throughout his history and various appearances, he's been linked to Ardrora, once his wife and the mother of his son, the ancient Contessa Erica Alexandra del Portenza, Mercy Graves, Lois Lane, Lana Lang, and even a version of Supergirl, which is a whole weird story that I will save for another time. Honestly, it's a pretty good weird story though. It's very bizarre. Speaking of unexpected ladies' men, Magneto for some reason has gone on to become one of the hottest male villains we have at Marvel Comics. Like, if there was a hottest male villains of the year list, like in a magazine, I'm sure he'd have topped it many times over at this point. Also, if that doesn't exist, we should honestly make it a thing. I would love to do a yearly, like, hottest villain list. Honestly, it sounds really fun. What makes Magneto so attractive though? Perhaps his sometimes stoicism, or his determination, his power, or his ability to wear red and purple together at the same time and somehow pull that off. Either way, he's a babe magnet in the Marvel Comics universe. Magneto has been paired with some of the greatest hotties of comic book history, including Mystique, Rogue, Wasp, and Magda, to name a few. Also, if you don't think Magda is insanely hot, just check out her Ultimate Comics version. Yeah, wow. He even at one point stole a love interest from the X-Men Cyclops. No, not Jean or Emma, but the lesser known and very human Captain Lee Forrester. The next one is probably more expected considering where her powers kind of come from. Carol is a Violet Lantern, so of course she has to make our cut here. Violet Lanterns represent feelings of love on the emotional spectrum, and Carol Ferris is one of the most iconic among them, so this list simply would honestly just feel incomplete without her. Star Sapphire isn't always a villain, of course, but she did start out as one in the comics. Also starting out as Hal Jordan's boss turned love interest turned villain. Carol has had many love interests over the years, including Green Lantern Hal Jordan, Hector Hammond pre-Crisis, Gil, Green Lantern Kyle Rayner, yeah, that was a weird one, and more recently in the comics, Nathan. Just Nathan. Though really, her tried and true love that she always comes back to is of course Hal Jordan. And for Hal, I'd say his tried and true is Carol. Though them ending up together long term always tends to feel like an uphill battle, tragically. Like Star Sapphire, Enchantress is also obsessed with romance. More specifically, she's more interested in making sure everyone loves her. She once tried to destroy Dazzler just because her singing voice was preferred to Amora's. Yeah. There's a reason I feel like Enchantress wears green, you know what I'm saying? Enchantress was also made to be the apple of everyone's eye. She is considered to be the perfect feminine form. So when men don't fall head over heels for her immediately, I can imagine it's very confusing for her. In some cases though, even the men who do fall in love with Enchantress get punished for doing so, being turned into trees for their trouble when she tires of her suitors, so that they will always be reaching out for her, worshipping her beauty forevermore. Amora has been romantically linked to Braggy, Thor and his Donald Blake persona, Loki, Scourge, and her creation, the Keep. Another somewhat surprising entry, but likely not the most surprising villain on our list? I don't think so anyways. We're talking about Deathstroke. Well, you might think of Deathstroke as someone who is too busy working as a mercenary or an assassin to get busy, or who's simply too serious to get romantic with people. His track record says otherwise. He originally was with his wife, now ex-wife, Adeline Kane, who is also the mother of both Grant and Joseph, his two sons. But he also had his daughter, Rose, with Lillian Worth. Intimately, he's been linked to the female vigilante, Patricia Trace, his part-time partner and part-time lover, Angelica, Talia al Ghul as well, yeah, his son Joseph's fiance, no I'm not kidding, Etienne, and extremely controversially, Tara. One that he denies, but I'm not fully convinced on that one. And finally, one which felt like a no-brainer for me, Mystique has to be the most romantically involved villain around. I was really trying to think of who has had the most partners, and when I was cycling through villains in my mind and I came upon Mystique, I thought, that's it, that's the one. that's who's the top of the list. The thing about Mystique is that, like Wolverine, someone who she also happens to be romantically linked to, she's been around for a very, very long time. And usually when you're, around for that long, you tend to have a lot of exes. Mystique even more so than some others because she tends to manipulate people by getting close to them, kind of weaponizing intimacy in some cases, and as a result of that, and as a result of what I would say is fear of getting too close to people and kind of not trusting them, she definitely has some intimacy issues. Her relationships tend to be short-lived in most cases, although there are a few exceptions there. Mystique's long list of lovers includes her wife, Destiny, Wolverine, Azazel, Sabretooth, Magneto, Professor X, and even Deadpool. Yep, she was briefly married to Deadpool. It was a thing.
I cannot thank the person that commented Clock King on part 1 enough because I now have the absolute pleasure of knowing this guy exists. He is fabulous and deserves attention. His real name is William Talkman. His costume's mask is a working clock. He has this amazing red cape that is lined with fur and a blue 19th century king's jacket, and even has a velvet crown on top of his clock head. His hideout is a clock tower, and the first crime he commits in Batman Brave and the Bold is robbing the Museum of Clocks. Not robbing a museum of their clocks, robbing a museum dedicated to clocks. That's amazing. He gets to the robbery on his clock helicopter and doesn't have powers, just clock-themed gadgets to mess around with. Clock King has been around for a while. In the 1966 Batman show, he trapped Batman and Robin in an hourglass so they would drown in the sand while he steals Bruce Wayne's collection of antique pocket watches. Later on in the episode, we see him with a very fancy top hat on his head with a little clock inside. In 1960, we see him for the very first time in World's Finest Comics, and he is pulling a look. He still has a clock on his face, but his suit is blue and has clocks all over it like polka dots, and he has a yellow cape, boots, gloves, and hood. The last time we saw Clock King was in 2023 in the animated show Harley Quinn. At this point, his head is a clock, and he's engaged to the Riddler. I need a Met Gala that is villain themed, and I don't mean everyone is wearing black and has a smoky eye. I want people dressing like Clock King and Crazy Quilt. Personally, I'm pulling up as Calendar Man with 16 costume reveals. Let me know what you're wearing down below. Time to move on to Clock King's brother. At least in the 1966 Batman show they're related. I'm referring to the Mad Hatter. He also has a very niche interest he is determined to steal. If you guessed hats, you're a winner. The one hat he wants most of all is Batman's cowl. That causes all the problems you'd expect. No matter what universe the Mad Hatter is in, he is usually wearing all green or all blue. Funny enough, the actor that portrays the Mad Hatter in the 60s show shares a last name with Bruce Wayne. Most variations of him lean into a lot of mismatched and fun prints, some with checkered pants, some with big bow ties with polka dots, and just lots of contrasting colors overall. The Mad Hatter is delusional but committed. Lots of his crimes are based and themed around the Alice in Wonderland book. He doesn't just like hats, he will also plant mind control devices in them too, so they prove to be as useful as they are stylish. At one point in Detective Comics 510, the Mad Hatter plots to take over Wall Street, the stock market, aim high my friend, and he just has a monkey. It's unclear where it came from. Lewis Carroll did create a famous monkey puzzle, so that may have been the inspiration. More recent versions of the Mad Hatter, like 2015's Batman Arkham Knight and the Gotham TV show, have made the Mad Hatter a bit edgier, wearing darker colors or all black, but I prefer the Monkey Man.
The New Avengers run was most notable for revealing that many of the Avengers superheroes had been secretly replaced by shape-shifting Skrulls for basically the entire time. It was during the Secret Invasion arc that it was revealed that the literal queen of the Skrulls herself had been secretly impersonating Spider-Woman for years. This meant that a Skrull had been the founding member of the New Avengers, serving as a double agent against Hydra, and even siding with the government-sanctioned Avengers during Civil War so that she could get closer to Tony Stark. The revelation of her true identity was a jaw-dropper, marking the climax of Secret Invasion. Now, despite the fact that she had been heroic for the most part, she was eventually ended by Norman Osborn, who's definitely not known for his subtlety, putting an end to the Skrull Queen's masquerade with a bullet through the brain, concluding her chapter in Avengers history. Next up is Magneto. While nowadays Magneto is considered more of an anti-hero than a straight-up bad guy, his villainous roots definitely run deep. He's fought against the X-Men probably about as many times as he's joined them, give or take a few. But it's not very often that you see him teaming up with the Avengers, however, given his mutant superiority complex and how he detests humans. His stint as an Avenger happened during the whole Axis event that I mentioned earlier, the huge spell that flipped the moralities of many characters, turning bad guys good and vice versa. Now, feeling all good and moral, Magneto became one of the founding members of the Astonishing Avengers in a bid to stop the Red Skull. Putting aside his hate for humans, Magneto teamed up with Steve Rogers and even Thor as they would go on to tackle the rest of the Avengers and X-Men who had turned evil as part of the spell. However, after the spell was reversed, Magneto went back to being a human hater. Next is Wonder Man. Wonder Man is the original Avengers villain turned hero. Gifted with extraordinary powers by the notorious Masters of Evil, Simon Williams was trained for a mission specifically to infiltrate the Avengers, becoming the Masters of Evil's inside man. At first, Wonder Man's initial allegiance was, of course, to his villainous mentors. However, a moral dilemma sparked an internal conflict within him. In a surprising turn of events, he chose to betray the Masters of Evil, aligning himself with the Avengers fully to thwart the Masters of Evil's sinister plans. While this twist of fate secured the Avengers' victory, it ended up costing Wonder Man his life, as in a heroic act of self-sacrifice, he went down fighting for the greater good. Now thankfully, however, Wonder Man's story doesn't end there, because like most characters in comic book history, Wonder Man just couldn't stay dead, and he later returned to the land of the living, retaining his moral allegiance to the Avengers. From a villainous pawn to a fully fledged Avenger, at number 4 is Moondragon. Now many would consider Moondragon to be a morally ambiguous character as opposed to an outright villain, but I mean come on, her very first appearance had her take on the name Madame MacEvil, for crying out loud. She was known for orchestrating villainous plots like, for example, hijacking Iron Man's armor and forcing him to fight against Namor in battle just so she could see who was stronger. Now on the other hand, she was responsible for giving many superpowered beings their powers so that they could fight against Thanos, but everyone she helped create ended up becoming supervillains anyway, so yeah, pretty ambiguous. Now surprisingly, Moondragon got a shot at redemption and joined the Avengers on a probationary basis. In the Celestial Madonna saga, she joined the Avengers alongside heroes like Beast and Mantis. But she wasn't too comfortable there, and she eventually bailed before officially becoming Avenger, which was actually a relief for many of the superheroes on the team. Unlike some reformed baddies who stuck around for a while, Moondragon's run with the team didn't even last 20 issues, after which she went off to mentor Hellcat. Next up is Avenger X, the only villain on this list who actually started as a hero, but her deep secret about the insidious natures of her powers led her to eventually betray the team. During the days of Cap's kooky quartet, the Avengers welcomed Avenger X, an obscure member with a unique power, amplifying her teammates' abilities, which everybody thought was great. A support character on the Avengers that gives everybody a free boost? Well, not so fast, because this power comes with a catch. In order to fuel her teammates, she had to secretly drain the life force from others. Now, initially, she had the best of intentions as she genuinely believed she was making her team stronger. However, as the days went by, her methods took a dark turn. Fearing that her secret draining powers might get out, she began sowing the seeds of internal dissent among the Avengers, attempting to turn the Avengers against each other. The climax unfolded in a dramatic showdown against the Quartet, where Avenger X became dangerously close to triumph. However, the original Avengers made a surprise return, teaming up with their successors to take down the now villainous Avenger X. At number 2 is Quicksilver, son of Magneto and member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, though it was later revealed that the Maximoffs were actually given their powers by the High Evolutionary in his mission to speed up human evolution, but that's besides the point. Anyways, Pietro and his sister Wanda had a change of heart when he realized that he and his sister were pawns for their father, just tools of destruction against the X-Men. From that point on, they ditched the villain gig, opting for a life where they could use their powers for themselves and nobody else. When the Avengers had a hiring spree, Quicksilver saw an opportunity. Convincing his sister, the duo joined the Avengers, making up half of the second roster. Skipping out on settling scores with the X-Men, Pietro and Scarlet Witch proved their mettle in battle, even though this Avengers roster was initially looked down upon and dubbed Cap's kooky quartet. Although Quicksilver's stint with the Avengers was short-lived, he left a mark showcasing his superhero side. And at number 1 is Vision, who started off as a synthetic villain who had a heart of gold. Vision, the android initially designed by Ultron to be the Avengers' worst nightmare. However, if it were not for Ultron deciding to use the brainwaves of Simon Williams in Vision's programming, because if you guys recall, Simon Williams is actually the Wonder Man from earlier in this list, someone who's known for flipping sides in Avengers infiltration missions. And that seemed to be Ultron's fatal flaw, and so during the epic showdown between Ultron and the Avengers, Vision was unleashed to take down our beloved heroes. However, this metallic marvel had a change of heart. While initially following Ultron's orders, Vision couldn't ignore his moral compass embedded within his artificial being. And in a turn of events, Vision turned the tables on his creator, breaking free from Ultron's control. This newfound independence led Vision to switch sides, aligning himself with the Avengers to take Ultron down. And lo and behold, the Avengers welcomed him with open arms because, well, I mean, of course they did. He's the most powerful synthezoid to ever walk the earth. So from that moment on, Vision became a long-standing member, contributing to countless victories against countless adversaries.
I mean, there is a whole story in Marvel Voices Pride from 2022 about Loki being one of the biggest flirts of the Marvel Universe, where Loki is confronted by and has to deal with all of his exes. Loki, the god of stories and former trickster god, has always been a smooth talker since the days of Norse mythology. He's been convincing gods, humans, and all manner of creatures to hook up with him. His romantic love interests have included giantess Angrboda, Enchantress, his first love Leah, and of course in the MCU his alternate female self Sylvie, just to name a few. When it comes to the biggest flirt in all of comics, who do you think that would be? I can actually think of a few other people that are not on this list, and I'm curious to see if what you're thinking is what I'm thinking. Moving on, I feel like this list would not be complete without Harley Quinn. She has to be one of the most sexualized characters in all of comics, and also is a character who very much leans into, I would say, that side of herself. It's actually one of the things I really like about her, to be honest. Despite being overly objectified, I'd say, she at least gets some agency in how she's depicted in terms of like her as a character. And what's more, her main squeeze Ivy has often been shown accepting Harley's more polyamorous tendencies. Harley Quinn has been paired up with the Joker, Poison Ivy, Deadshot, Catwoman, Red Tool, Batman, Booster Gold, weirdly, and even Lobo. She also once found herself attracted to an alternate version of herself. It makes sense to me that Harley would have so many loves, considering that she is a really friendly person who tends to connect pretty easily with people, and who, while sometimes annoying, is also undeniably easy to love as well.
Marvel's Civil War number 2 is not the greatest, and it makes Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, to be someone who is just pretty unlikable. She just makes really weird decisions that get people hurt badly, like taking her Ultimates, admittedly a pretty powerful team, to take on Thanos thanks to an inhuman precognitive telling her that he will be there. Thanos shows up looking for the Cosmic Cube, which isn't actually on Earth, and Carol's tactic of just hit him as hard as you can, as fast as you can, probably sounds good, but it's also not really a plan at all. Carol absorbs an energy blast, the Human Torch is able to hit him with some fire, She-Hulk gets to pin him down, giving Carol and Dazzler the chance to blast him, and War Machine gets to lay down some fire. Thanos, sure, he's a little bruised, but he is a-okay, because when the Inhuman Medusa tries to use her hair to like bind Thanos, he grabs that hair and flings her straight into War Machine, who accidentally fires a missile at She-Hulk. Then, in the chaos following that explosion, Thanos springs on War Machine, punching him straight through the chest with his massive, Mad Titan purple grimace fist. Then, the Ultimates are able to hit Thanos hard enough to end the fight, but damn. Now listen, nerds, I gotta be honest, I never realized how vicious the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles can actually be. Taking place in IDW's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue number 44, the Turtles got split up. Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raph are on a mission to stop Krang from literally destroying all life on Earth using the Technodrome, leaving Donatello alone with his bow staff facing off against Bebop and Rocksteady, who were given orders to send Donnie to the grave. Now that bow staff gets maybe one hit in before Rocksteady uses a sledgehammer to send Donnie flying, and Bebop just snaps the staff in half over his knee. Even with some assistance from Metalhead, Donnie is still at a disadvantage, and as he tries tries to escape, he gets a TV chucked at him, and then he gets slapped across the face with a computer keyboard. Then the pair just go to town on the lone turtle before Rocksteady uses that sledgehammer to crack open Donnie's shell. It is brutal. Luckily though, they are called off before they can fully finish the job. In the Infinite Crisis event, Connor Kent decides to answer the door, only to find Superboy Prime, who is starting to go a little bit off the deep end, and he decides to explain how he is the one true Superboy, and he wants to do that by fighting. And it is intense. Even Crypto gets involved, receiving a kick to the neck from Superboy Prime, and after that little crime against humanity, things get real. Prime beats the snot out of Connor Kent, chucking cars and all manner of things, but Connor had called in the Teen Titans, who in turn call in the Justice Society and the Doom Patrol. That's 28 different heroes. But this only makes things worse. Prime basically is like a kid, and he doesn't know how to control this power properly or even understand what is even happening right now. He starts wiping out heroes, accidentally taking the head off of Panther. He then rips off Risk's arm and wipes out Bushido and Baby Wildebeest with his heat vision while he is crying. It takes a handful of speedsters to then trap Prime in the Speed Force and end the fight. Okay, maybe a bit of a controversial pick here, but Superman Returns has made the list. The movie, I'm talking about the movie. Basically, Lex Luthor has used kryptonite to grow a massive landmass out in the ocean, which leaves Superman completely vulnerable. He lands on the new island, and it's bad news from the get-go. Lex and his goons have already gotten in position on this kind of Krypton-like island, but underneath, embedded into the rocks, is pure kryptonite. Tons of it. So it makes it incredibly easy for Lex Luthor to push Superman down these rocky stairs and then kick him while he's down, literally and figuratively. And then his goons start giving Superman this beating that actually kind of feels pretty scary and real, and I was like not expecting that at all. I don't think I've ever seen Superman so unable to do anything, and then Lex has like this sharp piece of kryptonite that he breaks off in this gasping for air Superman, who then falls off of a cliff. Moving on, John Walker, aka US Agent, is not the most loved character out there, but while he is a bit of like an anti-hero, he's still a hero from time to time. For example, when he answers the call to fight against Norman Osborn and his goons during the events of Siege. In the Mighty Avengers number 36, he attempts to stop the Thunderbolts from stealing Odin's spear. Unfortunately, another USA affiliated bad guy who is slightly crazy is also on the field today, and his name is Nuke, and he is pretty ruthless. Nuke is able to use the spear against US Agent, slicing off both his left arm and left leg. US Agent would go on to be wheelchair bound, refusing any enhanced cybernetics, and somehow he was still actually pretty capable. Moving on to the third spot today, Atlas is a character for DC Comics created by Jack Kirby, joining the comics in the 70s. He was always intended as a kind of anti-hero, and he has more or less played out that way since. But in 2010, Atlas was brainwashed by an unknown villain to attack the Justice League, and he is one of the few characters to absolutely pummel the tar out of Superman. Sure, Superman could be slightly holding back against this fellow hero, but I've always kinda hated that argument because then it makes me think that Superman is just faking it when he gets absolutely rocked, and I feel like that's not the case here. Atlas is taking Superman to the cleaners. They're going hit for hit, but Superman, even with help, he just can't take it, and Atlas eventually knocks him down to the concrete. Now, coming up second to last today, following the events of Original Sin, where Thor becomes unworthy to wield Mjolnir, Odin's son attempts to continue his superhero career in Thor #1. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really turn out too well for him when the axe, Jarnbjorn, proves to be a pretty poor substitute for his mighty hammer. In battle with Malekith the Accursed and the Frost Giants, Thor has his arm severed off with his own axe, and he's left to perish at the bottom of the ocean. The new female Thor, who's actually Jane Foster, becomes the wielder of Mjolnir, and it is up to her to defeat Malekith. The original Thor does return with a new metal arm made out of black uru, and initially he wants his hammer back, but then he sees Jane Foster handling it pretty well, and he just decides to drop the Thor title completely and just goes by Odin's son instead. The man was crushed. And finally, in the infamous A Death in the Family story, DC not only slew a Robin, but they did it in the most disturbing way they could have. Jason Todd had disobeyed direct orders from Bruce Wayne to not go near the Joker. Joker. The problem was that Jason had just met his birth mother for the first time, who it turned out was a criminal working for the Joker. Also, he's Jason Todd, so he just didn't listen. He went to the warehouse where the Joker and his goons were at with the intention of saving his mom. But in a heartbreaking turn of events, his own mom betrayed him to the Joker to save herself, which of course doesn't actually save her at all. And the Joker leaves her to pass away with Jason anyways. Joker is shown repeatedly beating the snot out of Jason Todd with a crowbar. It's harrowing. Joker leaves him suffering on the brink with an explosive device, and the hero manages to push through his injuries to get to the door with the help of his mom, only to find out that the Joker had locked them both inside.
A number of villains were created specifically for the 1966 Batman show, Egghead being one of them. He is an egotistical, egg-obsessed man whose brain is too big for his head, which is why it's so long. This man is pretty exceptional. He was a professor at Gotham Academy. He eventually turned to a life of crime, working with the likes of the Riddler. It's unclear why he stepped into villainhood. Maybe one day he just cracked. During his villain activities, he met a woman and fell in love, but she didn't want to marry until Egghead was better off financially, so he hatched a plan to take over the city. This did not go over easy for him, and he was foiled by Batman. He later tried to hatch a dinosaur, which Batman did not let that slide and defeated him again. He's gone from the screen to the page to the big screen in various cameos. Egghead is one of the only villains to figure out that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Due to the enormous expense of the heroes, he used clues about Batman's mannerisms to make the connection. One of my personal irrational fears is that my atoms and whatever I'm currently touching's atoms will line up perfectly and I will be painfully fused into whatever that thing is. In our world, I know that's not scientifically possible, but in the Marvel universe, it seems to be. Maybe. In Spidey's Super Stories 8, Spider-Man encounters a man fused with a wall, making him the Wall. He was a regular kid until an accident at work permanently altered his being. The accident being an entire brick wall coming crashing down on him. It's not really explained how he fuses with the bricks, but the only semi-plausible reason I can think of is their atoms lining up, which hopefully they'll line up again and he can be freed. We only see him in Spidey's stories, but he was based on a character created for the Electric Company TV show. The Spidey Super Stories and the show went hand in hand. The show was designed to entice kids to practice speech and writing, as were the Spidey comics. Marvel provided Spidey to the channel for free, and he wasn't the only big name there. Morgan Freeman and Rita Moreno starred as well. As for the Wall, we don't see him again until a profile on the Marvel Strike Force website goes up. Batman's valet, Alfred, is a saint and deserves nothing but good things, so why did the creators of Detective Comics feel the need to crush him with a boulder, have his body kidnapped and experimented on, and brought back to life Frankenstein style, turning him into a villain wanting to kill his family? I don't get it. After the experiments are done on his near-dead body, his mind and body have been twisted into reverse, so all the love he felt for Batman and Robin is now hatred for Batman and Robin. The Outsider is a physically separate being from Alfred. Alfred is stuck in a coma-like state. In the final battle between the Outsider and Batman, Batman figures out how to get Alfred back to normal. The unfortunate part is that the Outsider is still inside Alfred and every once in a while comes out again.
But if we are going to talk about Dr. Doom, he actually had a moment where he betrayed the entire villain community as a whole, when his morality switched and he donned a highly advanced suit of Iron Man's Model Prime Mark 51 armor, painted it gray, green, and light blue, and became infamous Iron Man. This was absolutely awesome, and his costume is still one of the coldest Iron Man and Dr. Doom looks I have ever seen. His power was almost unmatched, with Von Doom's sorcery being mixed with the technology and arsenal of Iron Man. He was a force to be reckoned with, but it wasn't just that. Doom had spent years as one of the biggest bad guys around, and he had intricate knowledge of the criminal underworld, and he absolutely used it. A group of villains were all gathered together to figure out what the heck they were gonna do now that Doom had switched sides. That's when Doom just busts in through the roof and takes them all down. Heavy hitters like the Wizard, the Wrecking Crew, the Hood, and Jigsaw all went down in one go. Now switching over to DC Comics for this one of the main goals of the New 52 was to show the same old popular heroes in a new light for younger readers and to help make these awesome characters easier to get into. But it also had the benefit of introducing a few new characters entirely, like Atomica. Atomica was essentially a female version of the Atom, and she worked directly with the Justice League for some time, but simultaneously she was working for two other factions entirely. As the Justice League became a more and more powerful group and a seeming threat to the world, Atomica was reluctantly recruited by Amanda Waller to bring the team of heroes goes down. Now, you may be thinking, okay, but this is a list of villain betrayals. Indeed, you are correct. And it was later revealed that Atomica actually hailed from Earth 3, the home of the crime syndicate of America, and Atomica was very much a part of that team of villains from the get-go. She was never actually a hero. After instigating Trinity War by stabbing a shard of kryptonite into Superman's brain, Atomica then allowed the outsider, Earth 3's Alfred Pennyworth, to summon the crime syndicate, reuniting her with Johnny Quick, her lover. Thankfully, while the Justice League got completely clobbered, the villains of the main DC universe at the time stepped up to the heroic plate, and Atomica got squashed like a bug by Lex Luthor. 2018's War of the Realms is one of the most refreshingly good Marvel comic book events. It brought the Thor run at the time to an awesome end, with Malekith, King of the Dark Elves, invading the Earth with a coalition of villains. One member of Malekith's Dark Council of Villains was the adopted brother of Thor, Loki. Loki kind of toes the line between villain and hero, and here it's no different, as he was technically working as a double agent for Asgard on this Council of Villains. But Malekith knew that he couldn't trust Loki at all, and so he sent assassins to take Loki out, who obviously survived because he has the power of popularity. But Loki's real moment to shine came courtesy of his own father, Laufey. As part of Malekith's invasion force, Laufey and his frost giants invaded Earth, and a large group of Asgardians and Earthlings came to stop them. When Laufey grabbed up Loki's new mom, Freya, Loki was all like, "Nuh-uh," and he cut off Laufey's giant hand. Loki then gives Freya some info about Thor's whereabouts before completely gobbled up by Laufey. But that's not the end. Fast forward from issue 1, where this happens, all the way to the last issue in the event, and Daredevil, who has become this awesome god of fear, chucks Heimdall's blade, Hofund, into Laufey's mouth, and Loki, who had been alive this whole time, uses it to cut his way out of Laufey's insides. It's so cool. Now, most people recognize the Thunderbolts team as a group of villains and anti-heroes coming together to fight the good fight. Melissa Gold, who goes by the superhero alias Songbird, was one of the Thunderbolts' first members. Melissa had vocal cord-based sound abilities that were later replaced by a set of vocal cord implants that allowed her to do a whole bunch of things like generating powerful sonic blasts, sonic force fields, influencing others with high-pitched sonic vibrations, and even creating solid objects from sound, including wings, which were super cool. She became a prominent member of the Thunderbolts, which itself was at first actually just a front for Baron Zemo and his new Masters of Evil, pretending to be superheroes while they planned world domination. But turns out Melissa and most of the other Thunderbolts actually kinda grew to be pretty satisfied playing as heroes. Songbird, Meteorite, Jolt, Mach 1, and eventually Atlas began to truly grow into their own, and ultimately, the Thunderbolts completely turned against Zemo, stopping him and rescuing the Avengers in the process. They then became an actual vigilante group, at least for a while. Next up isn't so much of a betrayal as it is a minor mind control that resulted in a really cool moment. Taking place in Action Comics 892, Lex Luthor has picked up Black Lantern energy in the Arctic Circle, and he hires Deathstroke to come along as some added security. Unfortunately, when Deathstroke goes to investigate the Black Lantern energy, he ends up being corrupted, and Lex Luthor is forced to don his battle armor and hold off Deathstroke as long as possible. This is such a cool fight because even if it's kind of short-lived, it just puts two people against each other that you know you want to see. It's pretty awesome and somewhat close. Even though Luthor's strength is greater with his suit, Deathstroke is a combat genius and he's fast as hell. With Deathstroke being able to get Lex with more than a few good hits, and thanks to the Black Lantern energy affecting Lex as well, Deathstroke very nearly takes Lex's life, only to be brought back to his senses at the very last minute. Luckily, it only results in an understandable pay cut for Deathstroke. Now, coming up in our runner-up spot, when us comic book nerds were first introduced to Harley Quinn way back in Batman the Animated Series, she was pretty much just the Joker's love interest and a sidekick. But since then, her character has gone through some dramatic changes. A big part of why that happened is because it's pretty damn clear that the Joker only really cares about himself and has never truly cared for Harley Quinn. Their relationship is toxic with a capital T and is not something for anyone to idolize, even though that happened for a little weird while there. So it was actually super refreshing to finally see her stand up for herself in Harley Quinn issue number 1 from 2000. When Harley breaks her hubby bubby boo out of Arkham Asylum, her friend and eventual potential romantic partner, Poison Ivy, pays her a visit to deliver some harsh truths about her relationship with the Joker and how he is no bueno for the Quinzel. While she is characteristically initially in denial, Harley is eventually forced to admit that she was wrong about the Joker after he shoots Poison Ivy, who had disguised herself as Harley Quinn. She then defends Ivy from Joker's goons before actually trading blows with Joker himself, and even though she almost falls for his lies multiple times during that fight, by the end of the comic, she kicked the Joker to the curb, at least for a little while. And finally, for a little while now in the X-Men comics, mutants have found a home on the sentient island of Krakoa, with all mutants, good guys and bad guys, being offered sanctuary and a fresh start on this new nation. One longtime X-Men villain, Mr. Sinister, happened to have a genetic database that became a crucial part for the mutant resurrection protocols, and so Mr. Sinister was welcomed not only to live on the island, but also to join the Quiet Council, ruling over Krakoa. He began leading the Hellions, or Helions, or whatever you want to call them, and seemed to be actually looking out for Krakoa's interests. No, he wasn't. Enter the Sins of Sinister's story and timeline. After Emma Frost revealed that Moira McTaggart has actually always been a mutant with the ability to reset the timeline upon her passing, Sinister immediately gained a sample of her DNA and created the Moira engine, which was basically just a bunch of Moira clones. When he activated a clone's X gene, it created a save point in the timeline so that if events ever went against Sinister's plans, he only needed to upload his knowledge into the clone and destroy it, which reset the timeline and allowed him to begin fresh with even more knowledge. He managed to corrupt every mutant with his own DNA, putting them under his control, and he eventually conquered the Earth and very nearly almost achieved godhood.